Welcome to Breaking Sales, a podcast dedicated to helping you have tough, meaningful, and rewarding conversations with your prospects and clients. In meaningful, what we mean is these are the conversations you truly feel like you are the prospect or client's conversational peer. There's no anxiousness or uncertainty holding you back. You feel a sense of calm and confidence in asking the tough questions. You're not thrown off by the bad news, and you expect the prospect to think about and invest into the conversation as much as you do. On Breaking Sales, we use the filter of psychology and innate human behavior to deconstruct the many misleading sales approaches that actually work against your efforts to build trust and close the business. Let's get started. What happens when you take someone who spent 25 years training military special forces and you put them in a sales role? You get insights most sales professionals will never hear. Today's guest is Chris Harris, a member of the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, an authority on mindset, and a best-selling author of over 14 books, including the Book of Mindset, which just came out last week. Chris built such expertise in close quarters combat that he made a living teaching his own martial arts system to special forces operators around the world. But here's where it gets interesting. When Chris transitioned into sales, he discovered that the same mental frameworks that he made him elite in combat were the exact same principles that drive breakthrough sales results. Chris brings a perspective to this episode that you won't find anywhere else. He's someone who understands what it takes to perform under ultimate pressure and how those lessons translate directly to success. His personal journey from childhood adversity to top-level performance offers powerful insights for anyone looking to break through their current limitations. And I hope our conversation is as eye-opening for you as it was for me. Before we jump in, I want to remind you that Breaking Sales is now officially available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel to experience this conversation in a brand new format, along with future episodes. Now the interview. Let's get going. All right, Chris, great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, same. You know, I'm thinking back when we talked about a month ago, and we dove right into sales and we dove into leadership and stuff, but I wanted to slow down, and I've done some research on you, and it's amazing. Maybe you could just start a little bit with your background and how you grew up and how you got into martial arts and that journey that you were on.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, grew up in Dayton, Ohio. Mother was a drug addict and a drug dealer. Heroin was her drug of choice. She got arrested and thrown into prison when I was 10. At the time, my sisters were 11 and 12. So that was a pretty monumental day for the three of us, but the two of them were taken away by Child Protective Services. They went one way. I went another way. We never lived under the same roof again. Always lived in the same town, but never under the same roof. And this is where I really learned the power of perspective. You know, years later, both of my sisters turned out to be like my mother, strongly addicted to drugs and chasing the same demons. And but if you would have asked my sisters how their lives just turned out so horribly, they would have squared you in the eye, Dan, and with all the resolve of their faith, they would have said, well, that's easy. My mother was a drug addict. If the same person turned and looked at me and said, Chris, how'd your life turn out so well? I'd say, well, that's easy. My mother was a drug addict. And so I really learned the power of perspective at a young age. And not too long before, or probably a couple months really before she got arrested. And the dates are a little fuzzy because it was a long time ago, but we were living in the projects, government housing. And a black belt in martial arts from the local church decided that he wanted to invest some time into, the boys that lived in the community, because none of us had fathers. And he wanted to teach us, self-respect and self-discipline. And he came and started teaching martial arts classes in the rec center. And it was the first time I realized I was good at something, and I had a passion for it. And I just, I ate it up. And no matter where I lived, how many foster families I lived with, wherever I moved to, the very first thing I would do is I would go find a local karate school, something I could either walk to or ride my bike to, which wasn't very hard, living in the city. And I would just kind of, play the little orphan boy card and say, what can I do to get some free training? I mean, I'll work for it. I'll scrub your floors. But, and everywhere I went, there was always a school that would extend that offer out to me and let me work off my training. And that was phenomenal, because by the time I was in high school, by the time I graduated high school, actually, and went to the military, I had trained in multiple disciplines. The Japanese disciplines, the Chinese, the Korean, Muay Thai. So I just had so much well-versed experience from all those. Every time I moved to a different foster family, it was almost like getting a new Christmas present. Like, what's the nearest school to where they live? And so this kind of evolved into me taking the highlights, the greatest hits from each of these systems, and eventually putting together a system called Roku Jitsu, which I really created for one very unique purpose. I wanted to teach special forces. And so I wanted something that was void of all the fluff, the katas, the sport, the stretching, the calisthenics. Let's just, learning sticks and nunchucks and bow staffs. I just wanted like the raw greatest hits of how do you win a fight very quickly. And, but I visualized that for a long time. And in 1993, I started training military and special forces, close quarters combat, my system, as a private contractor. And I did that for 25 years, and I absolutely loved it. You talk about these people looking for their meaning, their purpose, their passion, their why. I had it and didn't even know that those were questions you had to be asking. So any questions? And then before I tell you how I pivoted into sales?
I have to ask, because I'm embarrassed to say this. I've done boxing at a very minimal level, but I already know what it's like to get punched in the face hard. What's the mental makeup of that kind of hand-to-hand combat?
So it's a lot of control and restraint, joint manipulation, takedowns. There are strikes, but the strikes are usually close range or super close range. Super close range. So close range means I don't have to take a step. Just from wherever my feet are planted, I can hit you close-handed. Super close range means that I would literally need to push you off of me and create more distance so that we could, continue the altercation. So there's knees, there's elbows, there's forearms, but joint manipulation, control and restraint, and takedowns are probably the heart of it. It's really designed to end something fast. And when I say fast, I'm talking about a couple of seconds.
The fear part, and we're all different. I know that. How do you manage the fear part, right? I mean, going into close hand-to-hand combat, there's got to be some level of fear, or does just prep and practice take over?
If you're fearful, you probably shouldn't be in that fight. Fear diminishes as confidence increases. So, at the level that I was teaching, I just didn't wake up one day and say I wanted to train, tier 1 special forces for U.S. and U.S. allies. No, I got to the point to where I knew that I had the skill set to walk into a room with 6 operators and to teach them something that would make them better. I knew that, maybe not at handguns or sniper rifles or, land navigation or, halo jumping, none of that. But when it came to this one thing, my one thing, was it the City Slickers? You remember Curly, the one thing? I had that one thing. and I was great at that one thing. And it came through earned effort. And I spent years, when everybody else was going out and, chasing girls and drinking beer and all the things that guys do in their early 20s, I was laying low and getting strong. I mean, I was training in the morning. I was training at night. I was training bloody and broken. I was very driven. I had a very strong goal. And that, what that did was that brought forth a very high level of skill. And so if I went toe to toe with you, I had the mindset that, there was no fear because the mindset was so strong. And, hope says, I hope I win. I want to win this fight. You go one step further and you got faith. And faith says, well, I believe I can beat you. I believe I'm going to win. And then you have mindset, which says, no, I know I'm going to win. I went one step further than mindset. I actually went into what the special forces operators called relative superiority. And relative superiority is when you have exhibited so much skill and talent that before you even step onto the mat or into the ring, your enemy knows they can't beat you. It'd be like in sales. In sales, there's always like that one thoroughbred that you hope you never have to go against. And when you find out that that's who you're competing against, you just put your head down and say, "Oh no, not him or not her." That's relative superior. That person has won so many times in so many deals that it's just discouraging the moment you find out that's who you're competing against. That's who you want to be in sales. When the competitors find out they're competing against you, they just walk away downtrodden. That's relative superiority.
So, going to your story briefly, were you naturally talented at it, or was it just the drive and the investment that you made over the years that helped you get to that level that you attained?
I was given some talent, not Tiger Woods level, not Michael Jordan level, but I definitely had some talent. But herein lies the gift. When you give someone talent who also has other things in their life, they may or may not appreciate that talent, to the level of someone like me. Eddie Murphy used to say when he was doing stand-up comedy that, when you're hungry enough and someone gives you a saltine cracker, that is the most delicious thing you've ever eaten. And you're like, is this a salty? This is delicious. And that's what it was like, when I got that just little bit of talent, and it was a gift, it is a gift, but I had nothing else. I had no approval. I had no one loving me. I had no one encouraging me. I had no one telling me that one day I was going to be able to do great things and that whatever I put my mind to, I was just basically told to get out of the way and be quiet. And so all of a sudden I had this one little thing that I had a gift for. And I rode that thing like Seabiscuit. So I would say that a little talent, but it went a long way. Because I felt like it was all I had, and it was the first time I'd ever felt approval or recognition in my life.
What's interesting is you learned at a young age, it sounds like, that A, nobody's coming to save you, and B, you better learn how to bet on yourself.
Well, I got to the place to where I was very confident that I was given the tools to save myself, as long as I was willing to do the work.
Out of curiosity, did you have any mentors along the way, even if they were just periodically show up in your life? Was there some folks there that helped guide a little bit or gave you just enough?
There were people, the problem is that most not all, okay, this is not a blanket statement, but most martial arts instructors and martial arts schools, they're very competitive with one another. And they believe they have the best system, and they believe that they've got the best school, and they believe they produce the best black belts. And, and so there's just a real high level of inter-school competition. And that actually was something I had to undo. I had to spend years undoing that. So the mentors that I had at the time, I'm training in Cobra Kai and I think it's the best thing ever. And years later you get out of that and you watch Karate Kid for the first time and you're like, oh, I was Cobra, I was Johnny. And so, yeah, mentors. And a lot of them I had to untie the lie and say, man, the only one we should really be competing with is ourselves, not sweep the leg. So there were a few really good ones in the mix, though. But you're dealing with, for me, most of the instructors I had were strong alpha males, who thought if you weren't first, you were last, and that you needed to be sweeping the leg. So, I had to do that.
Speaking of which, I know you, if you could share a little bit, because you and I talked about this a little bit. To win the quote unquote contract to teach another country's elite in hand-to-hand combat, what was that RFP process like?
So that happened frequently when you were going to do work for a U.S. ally in another country. So in the U.S., typically they know who you are. They've worked with you before, and unless you've had some injury or had a life-threatening illness or something, there's really no reason to keep reevaluating you once you kind of breach that high barrier to entry. But it is not the same overseas with our U.S. allies. They believe that we are all about hype, that as long as you can put it on a website, it must be true. They do not believe our testimonials. They do not believe our website. They don't believe our, hey, let me give you a friend you can call and ask for a referral. You're going to step on the mat and you're going to prove your worth right here, right now, today. I don't care about the trophies on your mantle. I don't care about the awards, that you've won in the past. I want to know, are you still the absolute best? And they do that for a reason. There's a very small, very limited supply of these tier one operators. You think, that you can just go out and get more. Well, first of all, there's only so many that are applying, to try to be special forces. And then out of the ones that are trying, only a small percentage actually make the cut. And then it takes so long to get them trained, and a lot of money. And so once you get one of these, once you get one of these tactical warrior thoroughbreds, you treat them like you've got Secretariat in the stable. And so what their greatest asset is their mindset. That's why they didn't quit. That's why they made it. That's why they didn't ring the bell and give up. Their mindset. So you're going to be extremely careful about what instructor, someone who's in an influential role over that operator, you're going to be very careful about who you give access to, who you give them access to, or vice versa, because you run the risk of having someone, give information that's contrary to all of the money and all the hard work that they spent getting them to this place. And so it's not just, is this person the best person to teach this specific subject to my warriors? Is their mindset where my warriors' mindset? Because if I bring someone in, and let's just say they're the best in the world at what they do, but they're a Tommy Downer, if we get in this situation and you find yourself losing, whoa, what did you just say to my men? There's no crying in baseball. We don't say the word can't. So it's not just them making sure that your current skill is relevant and aligned with all your marketing. It's also making sure that you've got the mindset that aligns with the people you're giving them access to. And so in that particular story that I told you, the request for quote came out. We call them tenders. So the tender came out for, basically there were 5 men on the planet that received this tender to basically bid on this job. So their existing instructor had like a 3-year contract, and the contract was up, and they wanted to make sure that either he was still the best, or if there was someone better, that's who they were going to get. And so and when you go for deals like this, you got to pay for everything out of your own pocket unless you win the deal. So for me, you're talking 16,000 miles round trip, and I got to pay for my airfare, I got to pay for my food, my hotel, all this. So I did it frugally, and it's a $5,000 Amex bill. So, that's an investment. You're not just, filling out a quote and putting in your numbers and hoping you win. You're betting $5,000 and a week of your time that you're going to win. And not only are you betting that, but you're betting that you're not going to have a long flight home busted up, because there's losing and then there's coming home, with a broken arm and a gouged eye. So you better be darn sure. But they do it that way for a reason, because it filters out the nonsense. You're not going to spend $5,000 and come all the way over here for, what could be a 1 or 2 minute fight unless you absolutely know. So just the fact that they're making you do it that way filters out the riffraff. And so, but in that particular story, I got over there and, the fight ends if somebody is knocked out, if somebody passes out, or if whoever the senior leader in that particular room is says stop. Like, I've seen enough. All right, this is a clear decision. And so that's it. I mean, there's no tapping out. There's no referee who's going to come over and break you apart. It's on. You're either the best fighter in the room or you're not.
So how'd that go?
I won. It didn't take very long. It was a matter of seconds, not minutes. But I basically got to the dominant blind side of the other fighter. And, once you get to the blind side, you're at a significant advantage because, one, they lose their depth of field. You're in their peripheral, so they lose their depth of field. They now have to move at least one step to turn to get back to the depth of field. And not only that, but the reason you have such a significant advantage when you get into that blind spot, whether alpha or beta side, every fighter has 10 weapons, right? We have 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 elbows, 2 knees, we have teeth, and we have a head. And so the goal is to get to where I have 10 and you have 5. If I get to where I have 10 and you have 5, I win. So if I stand in front of you and I fight you head on, that's called fighting in the bear's cave. You never want to fight in the bear's cave because that means you have 10, I have 10. But the moment I can step off to the left or right and get into your peripheral, I have 10 and you have 5 because I basically just eliminated half your weapons. And so at that point, I'm in a very advantageous position. And so I got to that blind side, and once I did, I knew I had it, and just took him out.
I love the story. I do. And what I like most, though, is it's the technical side that you articulate. It's the thought, the purposeful. You knew what you needed to do. It wasn't just intensity and force. There was technique and understanding strategy for you to win that fight.
When I pivoted to sales, Dan, I didn't realize how much that I had been teaching for 25 years that was so applicable to being great in sales. And just to give you an example, in sales, I mean, in close quarters combat, you have 5 weapons. Okay, I mean, you have delivery method, you have 10, but you actually have kind of 5 pillars of weaponry, I should say. You have speed, you have power, you have energy, you have stealth, and accuracy. You have accuracy, okay? And they're all very different, and they're all derived from different means. Like, power is, derived from transferring body weight and rotating hips, right? Energy is derived from a rapid change of direction. And I'm in sales and I'm sitting here going, all right, I'm basically selling this very expensive technology in a highly competitive environment. And, and I'm sitting now in a room with someone who I know is going to be talking to at least 2 other companies because of the price point, right? They're going to do their due diligence. And I'm like, all right, what are my weapons here, right? Because we all sound exactly the same to the person who's sitting across from us. What can I do better or different that means something to this customer? So what are my weapons and what's the best weapon for this particular? So, it's like I was already thinking like this. I just had to basically take this information and plug it into a different outlet.
That's why I was asking you earlier about the fear part in particular, because as you know, in your experience, and I do too, fear plays such a huge role for many people in sales, whether it's the fear of making the call, the fear of asking the question, the fear of making the tough observation, right? The fear of asking for the business, whatever it might be. that mindset piece is just, it decides if this is going to be a successful conversation or not.
But fear, it's diminished the more times you do it. So when I made the decision that I was going to become number one selling the technology that I sold, the first thing I do when I put down like a big goal like that is I ask myself really 4 questions. Okay. And I did in this particular situation. I mean, I literally told my wife, I'm going to become number one in the world selling this technology. All right. Then it's time to ask what I call the focus and friction questions. All right. So the 2 focus questions, the first one is meaning, right? There's got to be some kind of meaning attached to this, because when this stuff gets hard and I'm in the trenches and I feel like giving up, grit and grind and resilience have to have something to attach itself to. Well, it's going to attach itself to my meaning, right? What do they say? Remember why you started? So my meaning, that's a focus question. And the second focus question is this: what's my process? Because the process, look, if you make a goal and you stay focused on the goal, you're going to fail. Goals are out in the future and they're not giving us dopamine reward. All right. So what's going to happen is eventually it's just going to look like some big, dream of grandeur, and I'm eventually going to give up on it. The biggest reason we set goals is because it's the catalyst to create a process. And the process is laced with like daily and weekly wins. And that's what we focus on. And that's what gives us the dopamine reward, which then turns into self-motivation and all this stuff. And so the process is very important, because the focus question of why, right? There's my meaning. Why is this important to me? What does my life look like if I don't do this? What does my life look like if I do this, right?
Go back to the meaning part. It was the grit and what has to attach itself to
resilience, perseverance, the indomitable spirit we all hope that we have when it hits the fan, courage, bravery, valor, all of these things that, we talk about, we use these words interchangeably. They're all slightly different, right? I mean, like courage is doing it afraid, but valor is doing it afraid specifically in time of battle, right? So these attributes you have to get across the finish line, especially in a highly contested or competitive environment. They've got to have something to sink their teeth into.
Which I like, because they're being directed then to something more purposeful. And you even mentioned it, process. And what's the meaning of the process, right? It's something that you can do and practice that's tangible. So you can take those characteristics that you just mentioned and you can focus and apply them in a very specific direction.
So, all right. So when I created my process, in that process, I determined that I had to make so many cold calls a week. And I hate cold calling. I absolutely fear cold calling, or at least I did back then. And the reason is, look, I was born in adversity, but I was raised in rejection. And so rejection it's an emotional trigger for me. And so when I think about the fact that, hey, I want to be number one, and in my process, it says I got to make cold calls every week. Well, when you say the word cold call, what I really hear is, how did you get my number? What is this about? Take me off your list. Don't ever call me again. Hanging up on me. That's what cold calling is. That's how it's translated to me. So I had to sit here and go, all right, Chris, how are you going to get over this? And the way you get over it is, well, there's really only a couple of ways. One is you get over it through just repetition, right? The more you do it, the more you do it, the more you do it, the less you're afraid, right? Repetition diminishes fear. Right. So, so day one, I'm just going to make 1 call. Day 2, I'll try to make 2 if I can. Day 3, I'm up to 3 calls. And you just repetition, right? Just get hit in the face so many times to where I'm not afraid of getting hit in the face anymore. And then the second thing is perspective. Perspective is a superpower that we all have. And, my perspective was my mother was a drug dealer. And so what is my perspective going to be on this? My mother is a drug dealer. That's why I'm number one. And for me, it was, I would look at that phone and I would say this. I had a mantra, and I would say, Chris, Everything that you want to achieve in sales and everything you want to achieve financially is on the other side of you picking up that phone. That was my perspective. And I would just talk myself into picking up the phone one more time. And eventually I didn't need to say that mantra. That perspective became a new attitude, a new belief system. And I got to where I no longer looked at the phone as rejection. I started looking at the phone as an ATM.
Right. Because you reframed the fear. You changed the perspective.
Yeah, reframing for me is really the verbal articulation of that perspective change.
Over and over and over, right? Until you got comfortable with it and it became a strength, I would assume, at some point.
Well, look, we know this for a fact. There's a lot of studies that prove this, that 90 to 95% of buying decisions are made in the subconscious mind. Okay, we know that, right? And then people, once they make that decision, then of course 5% of it is them justifying it with logic, right? Well, we sell the same way. 95% of what we're saying and doing in sales is happening in the subconscious mind. So, well, the subconscious mind, it's like a program that's running on your computer. If you want to rewire that or reprogram that, it doesn't know the difference between truth or a lie. It doesn't know the difference between something that's fabricated or reality. It doesn't know the fact between a fact or a fib. It doesn't. All it knows is the emotion and the feeling that is attached to whatever we're saying. We've got this mantra, and we're visualizing and we're trying to speak positively. I'm going to be number one. Well, that means nothing. That's not rewriting anything in your subconscious mind. The only thing that ever happens to go down there and rewrite code is stuff that has real, genuine meaning and emotion and feelings attached to it. That's what makes the subconscious mind stand up and take notice. So the same way buyers are buying is the same way that we're selling. We're selling for our subconscious mind, which means even though I'm trying to sound confident, my fear of rejection is really coming through. And so when I look at that phone and I say, everything that I want to achieve in sales and everything that I want to achieve financially is on the other side of picking up that phone, and I start to believe it, and there's motion and a feeling attached to it. Every time I say that, I'm not talking myself into picking up the phone. I'm rewriting the code that says rejection is bad.
100%. Yeah, I think I read a couple research things out there where supposedly 90% of our thoughts are routine, and a good portion of 85% of that 90 tend to be based in a negative bias. And so doing what you just said is so important, where you're rewriting the code in your brain. You're rewiring it to think differently about a particular action. So absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, because we talked about this. We talked about the 4 phases that you used to become an extremely successful sales professional. It's the 4 whats you were talking to me about. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The 4 whats. I think anyone who's going to sell something professionally for a living, who's tied to, some kind of performance, I think before you pick up the phone, before you send your first email, you're studying the brochures, you're looking at the website, you're trying to figure out, your product and what makes you special. I wouldn't do any of that. What I would encourage anyone who's getting into selling a new product or service for the first time, I tell them, you sit down and you go through the website. That's fine. And you look at the brochure, but you do it with a different intent. All right. Your intent is not to learn what you're selling. Your intent is to answer 4 questions that every sales professional better know the answer to. And number 1 is, what is the product that my product or my service is going to solve? What is the biggest problem that my product or service is going to solve? Okay. And so that's why you do a deep dive in your website looking for that answer, not, tolerances and specs. And then the second thing that you have to answer is, what is the reason this problem even needs to be solved? Does it need to be solved just because we sell the product and I get a commission? Or is there an actual reason that this needs to be solved? Well, I'll tell you why it needs to be solved. Because if it's not solved, right, and then that's where you got to have a statistic, you got to have a fact, you got to have something that's meaningful and relatable to that person sitting across from you. And the third one is, what is the impact of that problem being solved? So we know what the problem is that we're solving. We know why it needs to be solved, what the reason is it needs to be solved. We know now the impact. And I know I'm not talking about the solution. All right, this isn't solution selling. This goes so much further than that. So if you have a migraine and I sell you an aspirin, well, the solution is you don't have a headache. I'm talking about the impact of not having a headache, Dan. I'm talking about looking at you and finding out because I asked you questions and I actually listened to what you had to say and I empathize with you that you've woken up with a migraine every day for the last 6 months. Okay. So Dan, I want you to talk to me about what a day feels like when you wake up with no migraine anymore, because you've woken up for months with a migraine. What does it look like going through a day, dropping your kids off at school, having coffee with your significant other? What does that morning look like without that migraine? Because that's the impact of not having the migraine. And so that's what I mean when what is the impact of the problem being solved? Well, he doesn't have a headache. No, that's the solution. All right, we're talking about a quality of life that changes here, right? We're talking about an identity shift. We're talking about the difference between almost filing bankruptcy to expanding and getting more property, right? Impact. And then the fourth thing is, what qualifies me or my company to solve this problem? Why us? And that's where we get into competitive advantages and differentiators. But they only matter if they matter to the customer.
What the impact part, number 3, was, you were describing, right? Helping that prospect gain perspective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Look, everybody who's talking to you in sales, they've either got a problem they want to solve or an advantage they want to gain. And you better know, and maybe it's a combination of both, but you better be very clear about that before you start telling them your 4 whats.
Yeah. What I liked about what you shared is that it's all about the prospect first. In phase 4, yeah, sure, you're now deciding what qualifies you to solve it. But those first 3 phases on what problems do I solve, what are the reasons it needs to be solved, and what is the impact of solving are all about seeking to understand the world that prospect lives in.
Dan, I've provided sales training in lots of different countries for lots of different companies, and I will tell you that the percentage of people in the training that actually know the answer to those 4 questions about what it is they're selling, because I always ask, all right, I always say, all right, everybody grab a pen, write it down, and look, it shouldn't take you long. If this is what you do for a living, it should not take you long to write down those 4 answers, right? This is what you do all day, every day, Monday through Friday. And I'm telling you, the percentage of sales professionals that can answer those 4 questions about what they sell for a living, like their mortgage depended on it, the percentage is staggeringly low.
What kind of answers do you get?
I usually get people that start spouting off mission statements and vision statements and things that are on their website, or a tagline on the brochure that they carry.
Yeah. And for our listeners, and I know our listeners know it, Chris's phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 aligns very, very well with what we teach at Lapa 180, and most of our listeners know the 4 phases that we teach. How did you learn this? Because I know we talked about it a little bit, where you've got expertise, right? And that expertise may or may not need to be shared, right? When you get to that, what qualifies me to solve? But you have expertise, and then you have this need to learn and ask questions. What lessons, or how did you learn that you had to prioritize the questions? Was it trial and error? Was there someone that just kind of shared like some philosophy with you?
Well, I was always taught back in the close quarters combat day, that, whoever is talking the most is at the greatest disadvantage. And I carried that into sales. And so I'm always, when I would leave a sales meeting or get off a sales call or whatever, I would always take a little, I'd keep a little notebook like this in my car. And I would always have something in my bag if I was flying, but a little book like that. And then at my desk, I always got little sticky notes. And I would always, when I'd get off a call, I would always write down, 30-70, 50-50, 90-10. And it was the ratio of what percentage of the conversation was me. That's the first number. And what percentage was them. And my goal is when I got off that phone, it better be 50-50, 40-60, 30. But if I get off the phone and it was my number, the first number was higher than 50%, that was not a good call for me. It meant that I wasn't asking questions. And if I was asking questions, I wasn't listening thoroughly and intently to get the full answer. That number will tell you a lot. And so, in close quarters combat, beware of the quiet ones. And, it's the braggart, the guy that's telling you how many belts he's got and who he trained with and the tournaments he's won. That's never the guy you need to be concerned about. It's the guy that's just sitting over in the corner, nodding every once in a while. And I wanted to be that guy in sales.
Yeah. Yeah. Because most, as you and I both know, most flip it. Most people want to tell and talk about expertise. It's a default. It's a safe place to go versus spend the effort and the energy to truly seek to understand where the prospect's at in their journey.
I'll never forget the day that I knew that I had made that shift. I was trying to learn this tech, and this tech that I sold, very expensive. You could get into it for as little as, let's just say $50,000 all the way up to $3 million per unit. So it got very sophisticated, right? But I'll never forget the time that, some guy called me, got my number and called me. So, I heard you're the guy I need to talk to. Why do I need to buy your product? And just said it like that. And I remember just that moment when you finally got your confidence in what you're doing. And I just said to him, well, sir, I'm not sure that I know that you do. But I think back to all the months, leading up to that. Well, let me tell you why. Knowing nothing about him, his budget, his timeline, his need. Well, let me tell you why. And the fact that I just said, I'm not sure that I know that you do. And by the way, I ended up closing that deal in a very short amount of time, and it was over $1 million deal.
It's not surprising because the trust that you build when you have that kind of honesty with someone is invaluable.
Was it Voltaire? I may be quoting the wrong person, but I think it was Voltaire that said, you're not going to be known by the questions that you answer. You're going to be known by the questions that you ask. And I probably butchered that, but you get the principle.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
As far as a mindset that needs to be developed for any sales professional, and this is hard for some people. They think that I don't know why this is so hard for people. For me, it comes easy, but one, and we'll just call it the three mindsets. All right, that every sales professional needs to have if they're going to be successful. And number one is, my time is just as valuable as yours. And it's not enough to say it. You have to really mean it. You have to really believe it. And number two is, you need me just as much, if not more, than I need you. And the third one is that the price of my solution, it is not expensive if you hold it in the light of the problems that it's going to solve or the advantages that you're going to gain from it. It's not too expensive. We hear sales reps, in these forecast calls, and well, the reason I didn't, because we're the highest, we're too expensive. We've got competitors selling the same thing for half the price. Okay. So then obviously you don't believe point number three. because I would never apologize for the price of my product. And I don't care if our product was twice as much as the nearest competitor. The bottom line is that for what you're getting, right, the solution, the problem, the impact that it's going to have on your organization, this is not too expensive if you hold it in that light.
That's the impact part, right? If you do a great job helping that prospect get clarity on the impact, spot on, the price is going to become less and less a factor. If you do a poor job on helping that prospect get clarity on impact, yeah, price is going to remain a factor.
I had when I was a sales manager, so I went from sales, and then I went to a selling manager to where I, carried a bag and led, and then I went to manager, and then I went to director, then VP, then global VP, and then chief revenue officer. So as I was going up through there, I learned an awful lot from the people on my team. But I'll never forget. We had a certain model that was a big deal if you sold it, because it was really hard to sell, but it was about $500,000 for this machine. And like when you sold one, like the manufacturer rang the bell. I mean, it was a big deal. Okay. And if you could sell one of these every couple years, it was just, there's people that went 20 years and never sold one of these. It was just a very difficult sell. And, but I'll never forget, he said, man, I'm like asking him what his goals are, for next year and all that. And he said, I just want to sell one of those. If I could just sell that one 800-pound gorilla machine, and I just want them to ring the bell and, send out the email blast that I sold one, and that picture of me standing next to it with the customer and all that. And I said, well, why do you think that you haven't sold one? And he said, my gosh, it's $500,000. I said, okay. I said, what does that have to do with anything? He said, Chris, that's more than I paid for my house. And I knew that was the problem right there. He's comparing the price of that machine to the most valuable asset he has. He's not comparing that machine to the $7 million worth of problems it's going to solve. And so when I had that conversation with him, walk him through, well, let's talk about the ROI for the customer. Let's talk about what this is going to potentially solve. And we're talking now, it's a fraction of the cost of the value that it's bringing. And when he stopped apologizing for the price of that equipment and stopped comparing it to the price of his home, and he started looking at it as this is something that could actually 10x return on the money for the customer, and all of a sudden something shifted in him, and within 90 days he went out and sold one of those things.
Yeah, it's just the word. Exactly, that's the word. The word just keeps coming to my mind. Perspective. His perspective finally changed. If you think your product's expensive, I assure you your customer will. I may have asked this earlier, but I don't know if I did really in the same way. How did you learn the importance of strengthening your mindset? Was it just the upbringing? Was it just those experiences? I mean, how did you connect that your mindset was going to be everything that drove you either this way or that way?
Yeah, that happened. I was, I don't remember the exact age, but let's just say I was 12, okay, roughly. And I was a boy, and I was living homeless on the street. And now I was homeless by choice, okay? So I didn't like living with foster families. There was just a lot of risk. It was very obvious that a lot of them were just doing it for the financial assistance they got. And I didn't want to be a burden on anyone. And, so anytime the weather was cooperative, I would run away and just live on the street, and I'd sleep under bridges, and I'd eat out of dumpsters. But I remember very vividly digging in the dumpster, and I was all excited because I found a bag of donuts, and they seemed fresh, and the bag was still rolled, and they were still protected. And I just remember sitting on the curb eating these donuts, thinking I'm just high on the hog here. And something hit me. And I can't tell you where it came from, okay? But something hit me, like I was disgusted with the fact that I was enjoying this. And it was like, are you seriously telling me that this is like the norm now? Like this is okay? This is acceptable? I mean, don't get me wrong, I was grateful to find food. But the fact that I was adapting to that environment and getting joy, even briefly. And I remember kind of one of those just shaking my fist at the sky moments, that what is wrong with me to think that this is okay? I need to want more if I'm going to have more. This is unacceptable. And that was the very first time in my life, I mean, that I really remember like something switching in me about the power of our thoughts, the power of what we give meaning to, the power of intention. And I mean, I don't want these damn donuts. I'm out of here. I am going to turn my life around. I will never, ever be in a situation to where I have to eat food out of a dumpster again. You know, kind of just what are those, I don't know what they call it, but it's like a soul binding tie, you know, like that level of covenant that you make with yourself, never again. And that was when I really started to just understand the power of the human mind.
It's a fantastic story. It's a deeper story than I would expect to hear from 99 out of 100 people by far. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's a ton of perspective on that one too. Because mindset, right? You have to understand what you're thinking, and you have to come to a conclusion at some point that what you're thinking is not working for you.
You know how I define mindset, Dan? Look, there is an all-out war that's going on between our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. And they call it 95-5, right? 95% of the war is in the subconscious. 5% is in the conscious. But that war, you know, who I want to be, who I think I am, who I think I can become, you know, that's all in that 5%. Yeah, but you've been programmed down here in the 95%. And that's just going by your patterns of behavior, self-talk, you know, the random crazy things that we think about, you know, when we're standing in line at Walmart and, you know, we're bored. And it's all of this stuff. And, you know, but when you learn the power of metacognition, it takes self-awareness to a whole new level. Metacognition is when we are consciously thinking about what we're thinking. And that is mindset. Mindset is the bridge between the conscious mind, who we say and act and think, like, this is the person I want to be, this is the person I am, this is who I identify with, but who you really are, right? Which is more expressed in your habits than your words. And that's the subconscious. Well, there's got to be a bridge between these two. There's got to be some kind of arbitrator that steps between these two and says, hold on. Back up. All right. Here's who you really are that you want to change. Here's who you say you want to be and are willing to do the work. And mindset says, I'm going to be that temporary bridge between the two of you so we can make this happen. That's mindset. It's the bridge between those two minds.
Is it a form? Is it similar, or a slightly like, is it kind of like self-awareness or different?
Mindset, look, first of all, no one knows where it lives. Okay. It's not some place in the brain. It's not some place in the body. Like we really don't know. Neuroscientists, if you were to ask them, like, for example, where does imagination live? Where does imagination come from? They don't know. You know, I've heard people say they think it's outside the body. I mean, that's how far the discrepancy is between, well, I think it's in the right hemisphere. You know, we don't know. And so all we can do is we can try to, you know, grab this smoke and identify. If you ask 10 different people what mindset was, you get 11 different answers. If you ask them difference between mindset, attitude, and belief, you get 50 different answers. So all we can do is we can say, well, what does it mean to me, and how can I use it to help me transform my life to become the person I know I'm created to be, or I know I'm capable of becoming? Look, our number one responsibility in this lifetime is very simple: to develop yourself to your absolute fullest potential. That's your number one responsibility. And you say, well, I've got kids and I've got a spouse and I've got a company with employees. Okay, the number one thing you can do for them is to develop yourself to your fullest potential, because you're not good to anybody broke. And so if we say, well, how am I going to do that? Well, we know that all the problems lie in the subconscious, and we know all the hope, faith, and love lie right here. All right. So somewhere between my current position, my subconscious, and my future trajectory, right, the conscious, where I want to be, there's got to be something between those two. And that's where mindset comes in. And it reels them in, and it keeps them together, and it takes what it needs, it changes what it can, but it's that metacognition of thinking about how and when and why you're thinking, and then catching that crap in the moment and fixing it.
For our listeners, would it be fair to say, Chris, that they can more than likely get a decent grasp of their current mindset just by the self-talk that they practice?
We can make up anything we want. All right. Self-talk is a tool. But look, self-talk means nothing. Remember earlier in the call, I said, what actually reprograms the subconscious mind? It's not thoughts. It's not mind. I mean, it's not thoughts. It's not words. It's thoughts and words that have feeling and emotion attached to them. Okay. That's what it senses as real. It's thoughts and it's words that are repetitive over and over and over again. That it pays attention to that. So it pays attention to repetition for sure, but it most certainly pays attention to repetition with emotion and feeling. So if your self-talk, I'm going to be wealthy one day, I'm going to have a six-pack one day. Look, if there's no emotion and feeling, like literally, when I visualize, here's how I visualize because of the principle I'm sharing with you right now. I literally, I always had the dream of being inducted into the Black Belt Hall of Fame or the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. Okay. Well, there's actually two different Hall of Fames. But I've always dreamed of being inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. All right. When I was in I don't know, a teenager, I met this guy and he had this big ring on it, looked like a Super Bowl ring. And I was just taken back. And the guy was he was just so well put together, X Factor, he had agency, he had that executive gravitas, he had it all. So you just really noticed him when he walked in the room. And now all of a sudden he's got this, looks like Super Bowl 28 ring on. And I was like, who is this guy and what is that ring? And I asked him about the ring, and I didn't even know there was such thing as a Martial Arts Hall of Fame. But I made a decision right then and there that one day I'm going to be in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. And I used to imagine myself standing back in the audience, watching myself step up onto that stage as they called my name to give me my plaque and my ring. And when I would imagine myself stepping onto that stage, I'd be overwhelmed with this overwhelming feeling of gratitude and satisfaction. And so I'm now feeding my subconscious mind the emotion of it already being accomplished. I'm looking at the end of it happening, not the journey of me grinding it out and breaking my bones on the mat. So when we talk about self-talk, it's a powerful tool if it's got all the elements that it has to have to make it work. But just saying I'm going to be rich, I'm going to have a BMW, you might as well be shooting a BB. You might as well be shooting a BB gun at a freight train.
Yeah, we also, if we do it that way, we're going to feel like we're lying to ourselves anyways. We're not going to buy into it. But what I did here is the visualization, which I loved, creates the feeling, creates the motion. Then you can use the self-talk because then you've got the feeling and the emotion behind it. It's just not out there on its own. Like you said, hey, I'm going to make $5 million this year. No, probably not going to happen. Yeah, I love that. I like that. Thank you for going through the details on that too, Chris.
And I'll tell you, when I finally walked on that stage to get my plaque and my ring, it looked just like I played it in my head for all those years, all those decades. It looked just like it.
Yeah.
The imagination is a powerful thing.
Yeah. Congratulations too on that.
Thank you. 22.
Okay. Yeah. That's fantastic. That's a pretty amazing story too. All of them have been. Anything you'd like to share with the listeners else, or maybe how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah. So, my website is chrisharrisllc.com, and that's the easiest way, just through there. But I would say that, if they're talking to you and they're working with you, then they already understand the importance of having a sales process. And I would encourage anyone who's in sales to find a process and be mentored in that process and learn that process. And so, because look, if you're not following a process, I don't care if you have a great year, it's not going to be repeatable. It's not going to be scalable. And one day you're going to want to throw down the rope to some young rookie. It's not going to be transferable. All you're going to have is a bunch of little, slogans and sayings and a couple tips here and there, maybe a nugget. But when you have a process, your success will be repeatable. It will be transferable, and it will be scalable. So, you're with this guy, listen to what he has to say, learn what he is teaching you. And then one day when you're on top of the mountain, because there's more than enough room for all of us, believe me, then throw down the rope and help somebody else up who's willing to do the work.
Thank you. You did mention a book you just finished, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it'll be live next week, and it's my latest book. It will be my 14th book, and it's called The Book of Mindset. And a lot of the things that I shared today, like with the subconscious mind and mindset being the bridge between the two, and the fact that we need emotion and feeling for the program to be rewritten, all of that stuff is covered in the Book of Mindset, as well as some of the stories that we shared, like having to bet on myself and fly 16,000 miles round trip to prove that I was the obvious choice. So it's kind of a culmination of my life's journey.
Love it.
And that'll be on Amazon next week.
I know I will be purchasing it, and I will read it.
Wonderful.
Thanks for joining, Chris. It was fantastic having you on here. I'm so glad we did this.
I want to challenge your listeners with one thing, Dan. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I want to challenge your listeners with one thing, because here we are. We're in the beginning of 2026, a new sales year for most companies. I want you to write down whatever your goal is on how much money that you want to earn this year in 2026. And after you've written it down, I want you to double that number. That's your new number. Double it. That's how I lead. I put down what it is I want, and then I doubled it. That's the goal.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great.
If I ask you if you could do 30 push-ups, and you say, yeah, I think I can do 30 push-ups, and you get down, you're going to start struggling around 27, 28, 29, 30. That's where you'll get 30, maybe barely, right? But if I say 60, you'll get down and you'll blow through 30.
It's true. Mindset.
That's mindset.
It's a great example.
All right. Have a great day.
What Chris's story demonstrates is something that I think is very important to all of us. Excellence happens through adversity. Yes, most of us haven't experienced homelessness, hand-to-hand combat, or the pressure of having to fight to put food on the table. But we've all had our own setbacks. As Chris said, his mother was the cause for his success, and she was also the cause for his siblings' failures. It's the mental framework that you choose to see things through that makes all the difference. Chris left you with a challenge. Write down your sales goal for 2026, then double it. I know some of you rolled your eyes when he did this, but take a step back and reflect on the point he's making. What you think trains your mind to operate at whatever the level that is needed to perform. You are training your mindset to stretch for more. Work through the struggles so you can adjust and achieve the things that you want. One of my biggest takeaways after speaking with Chris is the struggles and setbacks are a privilege. They're not a burden. They truly do make us stronger, and Chris is proof. You can learn more about Chris on his website, chrisharrisllc.com. His latest book, The Book of Mindset, is also available on Amazon. He's passionate about the impact mindset has on leadership, sales performance, and personal fulfillment. And before you go, don't forget that Breaking Sales YouTube channel is now live. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks for tuning in.